I talked with Dr. Deboki Chakravarti about her transition from researcher to science communicator. First, we learn a little bit about her work as a bioengineer in cancer research and her personal experience in graduate school. She then decided to leave academia, and she explains how she managed to find an internship with Scientific American, a leading brand in science communication, and what the internship looks like. And if you want more information, don't forget to check out the show notes on our website, www.scienceforprogress.eu. I am your host, Dennis Eckmeyer, and you are listening to episode 17 of the Science for Societal Progress podcast.
So my name is Deboki Chakravarti. I'm a PhD in biomedical engineering. I just finished my PhD in June, and I am working in science communication, both on my own personal YouTube channel, Okidoki Boki, but currently, at least as of October, I am an intern at Scientific American and on their multimedia team.
Deboki is currently doing an internship in science communication, but let's start with her own science. Her field of research is both relevant for medical advancement and fascinating from a fundamental research perspective.
So I worked at the intersection of synthetic biology and adoptive T-cell therapies. So I was specifically working on designing genetic controls that would allow doctors to basically control things like CAR T-cells when they're inside of a patient's body. So basically giving them controls over things like, toxic effects that might be working against the patient, or maybe giving them some more flexibility so that they can make the therapy do more things.
I would have thought if you try to cure a disease, then helping the immune system do that would be a kind of obvious approach, but apparently it wasn't. Do you know why that is?
I think cancer is such a particularly tricky disease because it's born out of your own body. I mean, even if even in cancers that are caused by like some kind of oncolytic virus, in the end, it's your own cells that are doing the bad thing. And what's really hard is separating out what is a cancerous cell and what is a normal healthy cell versus when you have like a virus or a bacteria, those threats are not always, but more frequently clearly outlined in our immune system. Just like over millennia of evolution, our immune system has figured out this is what a virus looks like, this is what a bacteria looks like. Figuring out what a cancer cell looks like is much, much trickier because it resembles our other cells so much. And so the things that make it cancerous are sometimes harder to define. And so I think people, like you said, like using the immune system seems obvious, but it also is part of what makes the immune system so amazing, is part of what makes it so tricky in fighting cancer, because it's very good at finding a few threats, but it can also go overboard and find too many threats. And cancer really takes advantage of that. So I think there, like a lot of these people who I hear now, have been developing these therapies over the past few decades. They say like when we first came up with this, like it almost felt like a fantasy, but then like after just kind of chipping away at all of this research, they've been able to turn it into a reality.
And this research approach has been influential enough for the Nobel Committee to award one of the field's key findings with a prize in 2018.
Yeah, so I think it was James Allison. He worked on one of the checkpoint blockers, which is basically these checkpoint blockers. This is one of the nefarious things that cancer does, where it takes advantage of these mechanisms that are in place to prevent our immune system from actually kind of going overboard and, going a little bit dangerously aggressive when it's fighting a disease. There's a lot of these checks and balances in place to keep our immune system from not just, completely annihilating our body to get rid of one bacteria. So cancer takes advantage of those mechanisms. And I don't completely remember the story of James Allison and how they found these checkpoint blockers, but it's so cool. It's really, really cool.
This going overboard and attacking its own body sounds a lot like autoimmune disease to me. Is that a related topic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of these, so that's one of the potential downsides of some of these checkpoint blockers. I can't remember, I don't want to say because I don't remember off the top of my head which one, but there's one that's a little bit more associated with potential toxic effects in the immune, like once you start to block that checkpoint, that's where those like kind of immune system going haywire effects can start to come up. So these responses have to be carefully modulated, I think, in a lot of cancer patients right now, especially because the immune system is sometimes a little bit of a mystery. So I think it takes a lot of knowledge on the part of doctors to be able to apply these therapies with care.
Already during her PhD studies, Deboki began a YouTube channel to talk about books. But soon she also began talking about her experience as a PhD student. I watched a lot of your YouTube videos to prepare for this, obviously.
Thank you. I appreciate the views.
Yeah, absolutely. They're very informative. I found myself in a lot of your videos, the problems about when you are talking about the problems as a PhD student, and well, not just the problems, but also the good sides and how you can navigate a PhD.
I think the most important thing that I realized in grad school, and it took me a little while to realize this, is that like the friends you make in grad school, the people you meet are some of the, at least in my experience, have been some of the most supportive people that I've met, in part because grad school is such a weird, unique, isolating experience that the one thing that makes it less isolating is realizing that everyone else around you is going through the same thing. So even you might feel like you're the only one who doesn't know what they're doing and is just kind of stumbling along. The more I talk to my friends, the more I realize that we actually all felt the same way. And so I think the more I talked to my friends and shared what I learned and they shared what they had learned, like the better we all sort of got at actually getting through everything that was going on. And I've always just sort of liked talking, just talking about stories, talking about things I've learned. So when I started my YouTube channel, I originally started it just talking about books. But the thing that I love about YouTube is that when people connect with you, whether it's through your voice or through your face and the interests that you're talking about, they're not, in the long run, they're not just invested in like your original content. Like people may have originally come to my channel to hear me talk about books, but they're also interested in me and what I'm doing outside of books. And so for me, it seemed like a natural fit to then go into talking about things in my grad school life, which, especially because it's related to science, I feel like people who are interested in books, even if they're not scientists, they want to hear all of that. They're curious about the world around them. So it sort of just started off just me talking about the things that I've learned, but the longer I've had the channel going, some of the videos that I've had about my personal experience, I've found more and more people coming to them and saying like, I feel very validated by things that you're saying. Like you said, like that, like you relate to it because we've all had that experience and we're all just trying to find other people who share it.
A funny thing that I noticed, there are 2 episodes missing from your playlist, from your Not My Thesis playlist, number 22 and 26.
Oh, okay. No. So I think the problem is that I might not have added it to the playlist. So number 22 is a good one. That's my bioengineering origin story. So that's the story of how I got interested in bioengineering. Let's see, what's number 26? Number 26 is also a relevant one. That was about searching for jobs in grad school. So that was kind of the story of how I got my internship.
So, if you've become curious, Deboki's YouTube channel is called Okie Dokie Boki, and the playlist with videos about her PhD life is called Not My Thesis. And there is, of course, a link in the show notes. Deboki spent so much time and effort going through the tough experience of graduate school, and she worked on a fascinating topic, yet she decided to leave academia. One of your videos in 2017, I noticed that you had already decided not to stay in academia. How did that come? What's so bad about academia?
I grew up in an academic family. So my parents are both academics. My dad is he is the quintessential professor. So I really feel like I grew up in academia. And when I started, I didn't even know that people didn't go to grad school because I just did, in my family, everyone has gone to grad school or gone to med school or some kind of extra school. I just assumed everyone did. So that was a rude awakening for me when I realized that was a very specific experience on my part. But I think I started grad school not completely knowing what I wanted out of it. And I sort of had in the back of my mind that I always liked writing. When I was in college, I double majored in English. I always loved writing, and like I said, I loved talking. So that was something I had in the back of my mind, but I was still very focused on research, and I thought, I think I want to do research. And just kind of over the course of my experience in grad school, I worked in a new lab. I was the first graduate student in the lab, so I saw a lot of the work that goes into setting up a lab and a lot of the forces that kind of dictate what kind of research you can do. And I just I increasingly realized that while I love doing science and I do love doing research, it just wasn't something I wanted to do after I was done with grad school. At first, it was sort of just like I would look at like the postdoc life, and I was like, that just doesn't appeal to me. And then it was just increasingly just, I think it's just research and working at a bench is just not for me in the long term. So I think for me, it was really coming to terms with really just accepting that what I wanted to do was something different, just being very honest with myself about that. And that took work. But once I got there, it became much easier to kind of move forward.
She then decided to go into science communication. How did she go about finding a job right out of graduate school?
Yeah, so my goal has basically been to treat the year following my PhD as a postdoc, basically giving myself room to learn new skills and kind of learn or kind of learn the space of science communication, particularly multimedia communication. And New York is the best, maybe one of the best places, at least in the US, to do that, just because there's so much media here. So I started applying for jobs and internships about a year. I started applying about around August 2017. I didn't defend until January 2018, and I didn't graduate until June. So I started applying for things long before I was ready. And that was really on the advice of my advisor. And this is like advice that I really appreciated. It's not suitable for all career paths, but for me, it was perfect, which is basically to start applying for things before you're ready, so that you can give yourself time to learn how to apply for things. I had never written a cover letter. I hadn't really written a real resume. I hadn't done this kind of phone interview. So a lot of these things were very new for me. And so learning how both what parts of my experiences to be talking about and how to talk about them, it took a lot of time. So I'm glad I started applying early. And so when I initially started applying, I applied for a wide range of communications jobs. So those were things like communications officers, labs that were seeking out kind of a communication specialist, more press-oriented jobs. So kind of a wide range. And the more I applied for things, the more I started narrowing down what it is I actually wanted to do, so that by spring, I was essentially mostly applying for internships because I realized I really needed to fill in a lot of the gaps in my skills, and I also needed to meet more people. And so an internship made the most sense for me. And I basically just applied for a ton. So Scientific American was just a part on a long list of things that I applied for and that I was fortunate to get.
What did the interview process look like?
All of my interviews were telephone interviews, so either phone or Skype interviews. Each place has sort of their own process, but I think that it is pretty consistent, and especially for internships, because there's sort of a regularity to how those kind of go, where you send in a resume and your CV and maybe some samples, and then if you're lucky, you get an email saying we want to schedule an interview. The hardest part for me was finding a room to do interviews in, because I was in lab and we had some strange conference room booking system that I didn't have any control over. So the most stressful thing was, will this room actually be empty during the entirety of my phone interview? But it was also great because having the whiteboards from the lab behind me when I was doing these interviews gave me a really good backdrop of other people's work. So it was actually kind of nice. But yeah, so I think the interviews, especially for an internship, and coming from my place where I don't have journalism training, my communication experience is all YouTube. A lot of the conversations are about, why am I interested in doing things like video, and what kind of ideas do I have for, whatever outlet I'm interviewing with.
What does Deboki have to say about portfolios?
Yeah, it was entirely my YouTube channel, which I was very nervous about. I think the thing with YouTube, especially like a channel that's very personal like mine, the quality, especially like audio wise and even color and visually, it's not necessarily great. There's especially some of my older videos where I was just learning how to do lighting and color correcting. The whole room is yellow. Like the audio is kind of whatever the audio I get on my camera. So sending that in a professional context is a little uncomfortable, especially because the writing is also not super refined. There's a lot of ums in there. But I focused on setting videos that I thought conveyed that I knew how to talk about science to a general audience, or that I thought conveyed sort of my overall approach to talking in general, where I feel like I connect a lot of ideas in pop culture and science and my personal life. Yeah, just things that could connect those. The hardest part is that my videos tend to be on the longer side. I ramble a lot, so I don't know if you've noticed, but so sending those as samples is a little uncomfortable because you don't. I feel like I'm being a little arrogant and sending people like a shorter video that's still like 8 minutes long. But it's what I had, so it worked in the long term, and I think it's people. I think the thing I underestimated is that being able to apply for things with this kind of different background, where I assumed everyone would be looking at all the deficiencies, a lot of people were more focused on, oh, this is interesting. We don't come across many people who have a PhD and also have experience with filming themselves and scripting for themselves and also editing in Premiere. So having that kind of strange background, I think in some ways helped me stand out.
One big issue with internships is the salary. In some places there even are unpaid internships in industry. And in the USA?
We do. So, I mean, journalism has them, but this is a paid internship. It's not a very well paid internship, but it is a paid internship. This is definitely a very, very big issue in the US that people talk about the prevalence of unpaid internships because, I mean, in media, it makes a big difference in who can take on your internship. If you don't pay, then the only people who can take on your internship are people who can afford to not be paid, and that skews then who gets jobs down the road. But fortunately, this is a paid internship.
So now that Deboki is working with Scientific American, of course I was curious about what she was doing exactly.
So luckily I get to do quite a bit. So most of our videos at Scientific American are explainer videos. So I've made like an explainer video on how to measure the distance to stars. Recently, I got to help interview and film a Nobel laureate economist, Joseph Stiglitz, who wrote an article for Scientific American about inequality in the US. So to sort of supplement that article and also help promote it, we filmed him and sort of did some animated explainers around what he was talking about to then basically feature his article more prominently, which was really exciting. I mean, you don't get to just casually drop in every day on a Nobel laureate and ask them to explain their life's work to you, um, every day. That was a really cool experience. Yeah, so it's been a lot of learning how to make animations. I'm learning a lot about how to shoot video. I got to record a podcast, kind of a little bit of everything. It's been a really good way to pick up a lot of skills.
And these are all Scientific American products, obviously. Which podcast is that?
So they have, so Steve Mirsky is their main podcast person, and he has two kind of, I don't know if everything's posted under Science Talks, but he does two kind of major things. One is 60-Second Science, which are short podcasts about recent science news. So that's where I was able to record a podcast, what I was able to record a podcast for. And he also does longer science discussions with either authors or scientists on his podcast, Science Talks.
Cool. And you also mentioned that you're doing animations, and that's for the video part, I guess.
Yes.
But you don't have previous experience with animations. You don't use animations in your videos on YouTube.
Nope.
So how is that going? Is that difficult to learn?
I really, really loved it. So it's really funny to me because growing up, I always thought like, my dream job, if I were going to be anything, was going to be an animator because I always thought cartoons were the best. But I never did anything in that direction. And now, like, I mean, I'm still nowhere near at the level of being able to make a TV show, but I've really, really enjoyed learning how to use After Effects to make animations. And I think there's a few things that I think it really connects to from my experience as a scientist. One is just the basic engineering of you create parts, like I have to draw things and I have to create my parts and then I have to put them all together. Like that really appeals to me as an engineer. And the other side is that it reminds me a lot of programming. It reminds me of like learning how to use Python and stuff to analyze data sets, because the thing that the way to learn programming is you just learn like 5 things and everything else you learn how to Google. Like and once you like know like the five basic things you need to know for that language, and you know how to look for everything else, like you're set. Like I think expertise in programming is really just you've done it long enough that you don't have to Google the other things anymore. And After Effects has felt very similar, where I learned how to do a few things and that's gotten me started, and everything else it's like there's a tutorial for, so I can look it up and figure out how to put the pieces together.
Another essential part of science communication is writing. At the end of 2017, Deboki unwittingly made a video on her New Year's resolutions. She had planned to work on her writing skills. It is January 2019, so I wondered how that worked out.
I think I've accepted that the kind of writing I like to do right now is not necessarily the writing that I used to do. I used to love writing essays. I used to love writing, yeah, I mean, that's what I like in school. You grow up writing essays, and I always loved writing those. The writing that I do now is for myself and for talking. It's for my own voice. And so that's things like writing for video. And I really enjoy that. And I think I'm getting better at it. I'm still not where I would love to be, but I think the more I've realized that that is a form of writing, the more I recognize that it's something that I have to that takes work and that I can get better at.
So what's the difference? I guess it's less formal, and you try to write like someone naturally speaks.
I think so, and especially when you write for voice, yeah, the taking into account your own pacing and kind of knowing the way that you transition, but also I was talking about this with someone at work the other day. We were talking about how a really common word that everyone has started using is so. Like I start all of my sentences with so. It used to be like, now I say so all the time. And so sometimes in my scripts, I'll make sure to I'll have all of my so's written in because I'm writing it the way that I want to speak it. And I make sure to go back and deliberately take some of them out. Not all of them, because I think it's a perfectly fine word, but I just don't want every single sentence to start the same way. I think the other thing that I'm learning now while I've been working as an intern is learning to write more for visuals. So for my YouTube channel, that's less of a thing because the visual is mostly just me talking and my cat running around in the background. But working on so I've been working on like explainer videos for Scientific American, and those are very much, you have to focus on the visual first because you want the audience to be drawn into what they're watching. And then you kind of write the words to fit the visual. So it still has to come off as like something that someone is naturally speaking, but you really want to structure it around what's on the screen.
In one of her videos, Deboki, who is Indian American, addresses the issues of diversity in science. Is the situation different in SciComm?
Sometimes it's hard for me to tell whether there's a diversity issue or not, because I think I've selected the people that I follow to be somewhat diverse. There are definitely a lot of things that I like want to improve about that, but especially like, for example, in terms of gender, a lot of the people that I follow in science writing are women. And I think I'm just sort of naturally drawn to that, in part because those are points of view that I've always been seeking because they're less common. So they might be overrepresented in my consumption, but maybe not in science communication overall. So that's something that I hope will continue to be improved, because I think that is a channel, or that is a challenge. There was an article in the New York Times about the experience of science YouTubers, if they're women, and the kind of harassment they get. One of the things that I definitely have appreciated about coming to science communication from a different angle is that the book community on YouTube is largely women. And so while there is harassment and racism and a lot of these issues in the book community, my audience is largely women. And so that means that some of those harassment issues I don't think have been as much of an issue for me yet. Whereas, if I'm taking on a much more public face in the future, that might become more of an issue. I only get like bad comments on my personal videos on topics that are more political. So like I made a video where I talked about immigration and I got some of your standard racist remarks. The bright side of having a smaller channel is that your videos are often not as exposed to the racists. But I made a video where I talked about sexual harassment in science, and most of the comments were great. And then more recently, someone completely random left like a very convoluted argument about why women don't want to do science and how it doesn't have to do with harassment. And then they followed it up by then writing a separate comment criticizing my experience, my appearance. And I was like, you've made this whole argument about why women don't want to do science and how it doesn't have to do with the way that they're treated by men. And then you followed this up with a comment where you are now treating me poorly. And you don't understand why women might not want to expose themselves to that, like on a daily basis. Like the lack of consistency in the argument just always astounds me.
The outlook for women on YouTube facing harassment with a growing audience is really disheartening. And yet, growing an audience is essential for science communication.
But I think a big challenge in science communication is that when we talk about science, our audience is often other scientists or people who are most interested in science or most invested in science. But something that I found really nice about there's been a lot of nice things about coming at science communication in this very roundabout way where I kind of got to it by talking about books first. I think there's a lot of value in finding other communities to go into, and like, because like, you know, we all have hobbies. Like you said, you grew up with like 5 hobbies. There's something really cool to me about bringing science to other communities or bringing them to your other hobby areas. And there's so many ways to do that. And I think it's a really cool way of being able to reach non-scientists and like making it clear that science is something that we all relate to in a lot of different ways. For academic scientists or any scientist, it's on a very intense daily level where we're always thinking about science. But even if you're not, like if you're not a scientist, there's a lot of ways that you're probably thinking about science that you might not realize it, or that thinking about science, the way that people think about science might be similar to the way that you think about other things. And that if you can find something common in how you relate to one area of like culture or a hobby, if you can relate in that one way, you can probably also relate in the way that you talk about science. And I think that's a cool way to reach other audiences. And I hope I see more of that because I think that's a really cool way to, just get to talk to more people. I think these approaches are also really cool. I think it is really cool to have the more conversations with other scientists as well, because like I said, especially when it comes to grad school and how to survive grad school and how to survive academia overall, like that's something where we also all need a lot more conversation. So these all fit together. No one approach has to solve everything. So
there are 2 climate scientists who are playing Fortnite on Twitch and talk about climate science while they're doing that. I think this is a great idea.
Yeah, I love that. It's really great. And there's so many more audiences that you can reach when you branch out into other communities. Like I said, in my case, I feel like I've been able to like reach a lot more women because I'm working in a community that is dominated by women. And I think there's especially like probably a lot of other underrepresented minorities that you can reach if you take these like alternate paths. Hopefully. That's my dream.
I hope you found this conversation with Dr. Deboki Chakravarti as interesting as I did. Here are the essential points that I took out of this. You should begin searching for the next job early. You should be open to a wide spectrum of jobs. Your portfolio should show your willingness and ability to learn new skills, but it doesn't have to be perfect. PhDs who also know their ways around media may have an advantage over other applicants. And if you are already active within a community outside academia, maybe they're interested in what you have to say simply because they already know you. Cool. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Now, please stick with me a little longer. I want to share a hot tip with you after this announcement. For the summary, links to Debokis' work and further readings, find the show notes to this episode on www.scienceforprogress.eu. If you have questions, critique or suggestions, get in contact by email. info@scienceforprogress.eu, or on social media @SciForProgress for Twitter and Facebook. If you're interested in the whole conversation I had with Deboki and other guests, you can listen to extended versions of our episodes on Patreon. Patreon is a service for paid memberships where you can choose the amount of your engagement and the amount of your pledge yourself. And if your pledge exceeds a threshold, we will give you some extra perks as a thank you. We are halfway to financing our monthly expenses, and it would be an enormous relief to have that covered. Check out the perks on www.patreon.com/SciForProgress. This is episode 17 of Science for Societal Progress, and I put extended versions on Patreon since episode 9. Episode 9 was the very popular episode on journal impact factors with Björn Brems. Episode 10 was just a short announcement, so in total there are now 7 extended version episodes of the podcast available on Patreon. If you go and pledge $6 right now, you can listen to all the episodes. And if you decide it's not worth it, just reduce the pledge or cancel. But if you check it out this way and then you decide that it's not worth it, please let me know about the reasons so that I can improve the perks in future. I wish you a wonderful and successful 2019. Have a good day. Bye bye.